Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ken Kirschenbaum. Thanks for attending our webinar today, which is going to focus on thermal imaging cameras. I know that's why you're all signed on. You also might be wondering what the heck has Kirschenbaum got to do with thermal imaging cameras? That's a good question, and that's why we've got Barry Levine, whose handsome face is on the screen along with mine. And Barry, who's currently muted, so he doesn't make too much noise at the moment, is the founder and CEO of Sperry West, and they are manufacturers of cameras as well as these thermal imaging cameras. So he knows all about these cameras, I suppose, and all the technical parts of it, and I don't. But this is not a technical webinar. This really is dealing with the question, can you sell and install thermal imaging cameras? This issue came up, I think, because I know one outfit that's been making a big issue of it. It is IPVM. Which is well, they send out an email. I'm not sure what they test and discuss all of these cameras. I invited them to be on, but I don't see them on. If they're on, they should hit me with a question or something so I know they're here. Okay, so anyway, they started me on this by asking my opinion on whether or not the cameras could be sold. So I'm going to first end the suspense by letting you know that before I end the suspense, let me say I just got this the other day. This is a question. You all know I run an email forum, and a distributor. This question is this info came from my distributor regarding thermal imaging. And they wanted to know whether they can sell it. What you need to understand about thermal imaging is the FDA is apparently the AHJ of these products. They've taken the position that all thermal energy equipment, cameras, do need to be FDA approved. That's what they've decided, because they say all thermal imaging cameras are medical devices. Yet the FDA itself talks about using these cameras in non-medical settings. Now, first, let's talk about a camera that you might see at a bar mitzvah, where they're showing, the heat, on the screen. This is clearly for entertainment. We're not talking about that. I don't think that will ever need to be FDA approved, okay? FDA approval is required when it's for medical purposes. Now, so FDA says they understand the difference between a medical setting and a non-medical setting, although, and if I sound like I'm confused, it's because it's confusing, because they are using the same terminology for medical and non-medical. But medical is the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. And they consider any device which is used for purposes of detecting elevated skin temperature as a medical device. The trouble is that using a device for detecting elevated skin temperature is not the same thing as diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. I don't think by definition it is. So they've added a new term, and it's triage. So FDA's position currently is to help expand the availability of these cameras used for body temperature measurements for triage during the pandemic. you can sell and install them. From a legal point of view, which is why I'm involved in this webinar, you have to be careful how you define your product. They're being manufactured as fever detection devices, and you need to be careful about that. So let me just go in, and Barry, bear with me. I'm going to rush through this webinar quickly, and then we'll open it up. There's a growing demand during this pandemic. The device works by checking elevated body temperature. If fever or high temperature is detected, there's an alert. This is used to screen multiple people as they walk through an area, and that's why we call it triage. And triage means that it's used quickly to separate those walking multiple people, so that you can make a very quick separation of people. And then the idea is that you would use a secondary device, a medical device, a thermometer, to check for elevated body temperature to see if they do have a fever. And again, even that would not diagnose COVID or any other particular disease, okay? But the cameras themselves certainly are not used to diagnose any particular disease. They are used for triage, again, triage purpose, which means to separate, this person has elevated temperature, let's check them. And again, you can use it. So who's buying the devices now from the alarm industry? Supermarkets, commercial places are going to be designing them. Courthouses and government facilities where people are coming and going. Whether they'll probably be at the airport, whether they're actually at the TSA level or before you even get there, that's another issue. FDA clearance is not required if the device is not intended for medical purpose. Again, medical purpose: diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, prevention of disease. Okay. Then the FDA confuses it. They consider all devices intended for medical purpose because it's supposed to be there to detect COVID or elevated body temperature. But right now, during the pandemic, they're not going to object to it if it doesn't create an undue risk. Undue risk would mean, in this situation, since the camera itself doesn't cause any damage, this issue raised in particular by the ACLU, which is now complaining about privacy rights and things like that. And we believe that that's not going to go anywhere. In fact, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, is allowing these things, and in its response back in April 17th, 2020, the EEOC indicated that taking temperature to check for COVID-19 is permissible under the Americans with Disability Act. So we think that it's not going to go anywhere in terms of whether it's unconstitutional or an undue risk or undue violation of constitutional rights to get involved in that. So you're able to do it. Is it medical purpose? Look, an alarm company should not be called into a hospital to be asked to install these devices to actually diagnose a disease, whether it's COVID or anything else. And I think you would understand that as a seller of these products. The alarm industry is not intending them to be medical devices or used in medical settings. It's easy enough to understand the medical setting. It's just common sense. A restaurant entrance, a mall entrance, a movie entrance, a government building entrance, these are not medical settings. If it's in a private room in a hospital, yes, it's a medical setting. What are you doing there? Installing non-FDA approved products. in that kind of medical setting? The answer is you shouldn't be there. So the products that you are installing need to make sure that they are properly labeled. And that's not necessarily the case with the products that are out there now. And Barry, this is something that I'm going to want you to talk about when I get done running through this PowerPoint. The labeling should make it clear that the device is not intended for diagnostic purposes. Okay, and you really have to stay away from the text fever. That's the way it's being marketed right now. I got an email this morning, which I can't get to while this PowerPoint is up, but the email this morning, fever camera. Well, I don't know that we want to call it a fever camera. It's an elevated body temperature device, which requires a secondary method to confirm any type of illness. So you need to be careful how you describe it in your contract. The contracts is FDA has, if you want to look at all the stuff that FDA has on that, there's the link for it. You can sell and install these devices without FDA approval. FDA approval takes 90 days from when you ask for it. I have no idea whether Barry will talk about this, whether any manufacturer has even bothered to ask for it. Again, we're not talking about product intended to be installed in a hospital or a doctor's office. Clearly, most companies are offering these devices because it's what's available to the industry right now and the demand that's being made on the industry right now without FDA approval. The commercial security all-in-one has added the protection from liability for the sale and installation of these devices. The all-in-one does not have any continuing obligation on your part in the operation or use of the camera once it's installed. You would have an obligation, I think, to tell your customer, here's the manufacturer's guidelines on the use of the camera. You need to be very clear in your description that it's for triage purpose, meaning separation, again, of a large number of people coming into a facility, but it is non-medical. You know, in the all-in-one, we have so much information in there already, yet I wound up, at least now, indicating the non-medical language, that it's not used for diagnosis or prevention or treatment, and we say it actually in two different spots. But where you would really deal with the issue is in the schedule of equipment and services, or your proposal, which you're using as the schedule of equipment and services. You need to be very careful that you're not describing these cameras like the manufacturers do, by the way, saying it's a fever device. Okay, that's it. What does that mean? Is it a medical device? Is it intended to recognize COVID? Is it intended to recognize any other disease? The answer is no, not from your standpoint. You are not a supplier of medical equipment, unless you are, which is fine, but you better be using FDA-approved devices if you are. All right, we talked about ACLU. And by the way, all of you, this webinar will be posted on our website, like all our other webinars are, so you'll be able to look at the PowerPoint in a little bit more detail. I also would refer you to my emails that I've sent out over the last week or so, where we've done a great deal of discussion on the legal issues of selling these cameras. False sense of security, I don't see how this is any different than the issues we had with providing dummy cameras or even guard response or guard service, when the public doesn't understand that guards are not going to actually do anything, even though they're there. Cameras, they're not going to actually do anything, even though they're there. It's not going to stop any crime. shouldn't make you feel any more comfortable just because they're there. They're there for the property owner, okay? So the commercial all-in-one makes it clear that devices are not necessarily FDA approved or medical devices, not intended for medical purposes, treatment or cure. Of course, the alarm company will assume no liability for the accuracy of the devices or the consequences if the devices fail to detect whatever it is they're being installed for. And it insulates you against claims alleging virus contamination from your employees, which is something separate than the camera issue. That's something else we threw in because of what's going on in today's world. Hopefully that's something that we can get rid of very quickly. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. You can get the contracts at the commercial all-in-one and get the disclaimer notice with it at alarmcontracts.com. Now let me see if I can bring in Barry. Get him back up here.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're there, Barry.
Yep.
So I said a lot. Hopefully you can correct me now.
There isn't much to correct, Ken. The one thing that I'm thinking about a lot, though, is if the FDA is saying, yes, during this pandemic, we're going to allow this, well, are they going to tell you that you've got to remove the cameras later? I frankly doubt that. In other words, I think that once these cameras are installed, they're installed. And I don't think that the FDA is going to start policing or monitoring and saying, well, this is over, therefore you have to remove the camera. I would be shocked if that would ever happen. And I also do think that, and I'm agreeing with you on this, of course, these are not medical devices. They frankly shouldn't even need approval because they're not being used in a medical sense. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm an expert in terms of what needs approval and what doesn't. I don't think that any of these cameras have been approved. I don't know that anyone that's applied for it. And frankly, since most of these cameras originate in Asia, I do not believe that anyone's going for approval on it. I don't know what the FDA's requirements would be because we know that there might be a 2 to 5% error factor. Well, would that be acceptable for FDA? I don't know if you know the answer to that, Ken.
No, I don't.
Yeah, because there is definitely a percentage that you have to feel there's going to be an error. But the same thing happens with any video system. Since we're talking video system, a camera can miss something, a motion sensor can miss something being triggered, and therefore it didn't do what it was supposed to do. Nothing is 100%. And of course, we know that a camera, a DVR, a hard drive, these things, they break. Well, then you're not getting what you're supposed to get. Well, that's normal. It's going to happen occasionally. Well, I think the same thing will happen with these cameras. They're going to be very effective in the long run in terms of overall, in terms of people knowing that they are going to be subject to something that's going to point them out if they have a high temperature. Because remember, there's going to be people that feel like, well, yeah, I got some temperature today, but no, there's nothing wrong with me and I can go to work and I'm okay. I don't want to miss a day's pay or whatever. But once they know the temperature is being taken, even regardless of accuracy and things, I think those people would be very reluctant to try to go past and get to work that day. So I think that just the deterrent factor alone is going to be excellent. But in terms of the facilities, and you were talking about some of them, and of course, because we deal with the distributors who are dealing with the dealers, we don't know everything about it, but we do know that some of the market going to include a lot of large businesses, police departments, a lot of government facilities, libraries, guard services, the armored car services, because they've got to check their people. They're people going into facilities, taking the money and putting it in the truck. Well, they should be checking them. Airports, bus companies, banks, churches, and other religious institutions, of course, senior living places. And I'm not talking about for the residents necessarily, because they're usually inside almost all the time anyway, but it wouldn't hurt, of course, to check them. But visitors need to be checked going into these facilities. You wouldn't want to know that a visitor came in and is starting to spread a disease to the residents. So that's, of course, a big concern. So senior living places and not recuperation, what do you call it again?
Rehabilitation.
Yeah, rehabilitation, etc. So I think these are major possibilities. I can't think of one cruise ship that should not have this, particularly with what goes on cruise ships. Some airlines, depending on circumstances, but yes, I think that would be important. A lot of military bases, because military bases have theaters, clubs, the PX or exchanges, whatever it may be, commissaries, and these all attract people who are former military in addition to the current ones. So I think those need to be checked or should have these cameras. They're good possibilities. Movie theater.
Barry, let me point this something out right now, because you mentioned the cruise lines. I'm gonna give you an example which shows you why these cameras can be installed right now and how they're installed. So let's take a cruise line. Because one of the questions here, are there any HIPAA concerns? So HIPAA is the governs medical field, and my office happens to have a very large healthcare practice where we advise doctors and healthcare facilities. I'm not in that department. I have enough with the alarm department. But HIPAA applies to the doctors. HIPAA doesn't apply to alarm companies. Okay, so alarm companies are not bound by HIPAA laws. You're not a doctor. Okay, so here's where
Can we play doctor?
Yeah, here's where it becomes interesting. So why is the camera being installed? Well, we're running a cruise and we don't want to admit anybody who has a fever. We're not suggesting to you. So we've got this camera set up and it's going to take an image, and you know, if anyone who's been on a cruise and gotten off for an excursion and tried to come back on knows that you go through a screening process similar to the airport, where you're checked individually coming back onto the boat or coming onto the boat. So also, I guess when you're getting ready to embark. So the camera is there, and it's the stated policy of the cruise line, the movie theater, the mall, whoever's there. If you have a fever, we don't want you here. You can't come in. We are going to exclude you. If you, I don't want to use the word that ACLU would love to use. We're going to discriminate against you. You're ill. We're going to discriminate against you. Well, guess what? In normal times, which this is not, they might be right. What right do you have to discriminate against somebody because they have elevated skin temperature? Well, maybe that's an issue. You know, what's next? Maybe because they walk with a limp, or they have they have some other disability. So maybe you don't want them in for that reason. But right now, because of this pandemic that's going on, the regulatory agencies, FDA, the Equal Opportunity Office, they're certainly relaxing the way they look at things. And so it's not, the camera's not up on the cruise line to say, wait a minute, you've got COVID, you've got some other disease. Come over here, we're going to cure you, we're going to treat you, we're going to do something else. That's not what they're doing with this camera. What this camera is used for, and I'm going to go back to the word that FDA uses. They don't define it, but they use it. Triage. We are recognizing this. You have an elevated skin temperature. You can't come on the cruise. It's as simple as that. That's our stated goal. If you were sneezing or your eyes were running, maybe we would do the same thing.
Ken, I would say that these cameras should not be used to eliminate people from any facility. It's the first indication. Then they should be checked with a medical device before they are eliminated from something. It should be verified. So an FDA approved thermometer, which could be 2 inches from their forehead. But if it's FDA approved, it is a real thermometer, that will verify that it is correct. because there can be errors. Errors can be caused by facial hair, too much on a forehead, which shouldn't happen. And of course, that wouldn't elevate, it would really go in the other direction. But there are many things that could cause it. If, for instance, people came in from a high temperature outside and they weren't given a minute or two to kind of cool down, their temperature may be elevated. So it has to be verified medically. The other thing is that while we are saying we're going to eliminate some people, well, yes, but what are you doing? You're protecting the other people. You're protecting all of the group of people who are going on the cruise, who are going into the theater. You're helping them to be safe. So, and you're not saying it's 100%. You're not saying that someone can't slip by somehow, some way. It can happen. There's nothing 100% in life. But the other thing, Ken, is that if you remember, of course, we all know, 9/11 changed things forever. Airports, not the same. Travel is not the same. There's a lot of things that changed after 9/11, and they really have changed our lives. This pandemic is going to be the same way. Things are not going to go back to the way they were, where, oh, yeah, we don't have to worry about anything now. This is over. No, it's not going to happen. We're going to always worry about pandemics, whether it is COVID-19 coming back or it's the bird flu or something else. They're going to find it useful to continue using some precaution, some devices. It's going to change our lives. So we are going to have to be concerned about being amongst lots of people years from now.
I want to raise another issue that IPVM raised with me, at least. Well, we're concerned about installing these cameras, they say, because they have to be used properly. I didn't understand that objection that they raised, or even issue that they raised, because as far as I can tell, any alarm equipment that's installed needs to be used properly. The alarm company is not staying there to work the cameras or watch the monitor. They're installing this device. They're giving the guidelines and the manufacturer's suggested use of the equipment, and then they're gone. Just like with the fire alarm system, they installed it and they're gone. And yes, if someone wants inspections and calibrations, I guess the alarm companies can come back and look at these cameras and make sure they're working, whatever. But they're not going to be operating them on a moment by moment basis. And so I think it's a given that the devices need to be used properly. Okay, so I don't see that as an issue. But you're not the one that's going to be operating it, but you need to make it clear to your customers, here's the device, this is what it's useful for, and go ahead and use it. Let me get to a couple of questions. I thought the FDA had a temporary waiver going to avoid this issue. That's correct. There is a temporary waiver. So FDA has raised this whole issue about the cameras and then said, but during the pandemic, we're going to let you install them anyway. That's the bottom line on this entire situation at the moment. What about medical cannabis facilities? I have no idea what pot has to do with this issue, and so I can't help you with that one.
Well, Ken, I would look at that the same way that I look at everything else, in that people are going to be going in to buy cannabis. Well, you want to know that they don't have high temperature going in, so there's no reason that they could not use a device like this. And
well, I didn't know that that's what he meant by that question. You can use it at any doorway you want, I suppose, at every office building, every office suite, every supermarket, wherever people are. And obviously, by the way, the effectiveness of the device is going to be, and I'll defer to Barry on this one, but obviously, if you've got a camera in an airport up on the ceiling somewhere looking at hundreds of people at once, I would imagine it's going to work a little bit differently than when you funnel them through and look at them one at a time. It's just going to work differently, right? Obviously. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So the question came up, is the FDA going to eventually say, wait a minute, you have to remove all these cameras? Is the ACLU going to get a lawsuit, say, wait a minute, you can't use them anymore? Well, first of all, I'd like to say, let's hope so. But as Barry's pointed out, we don't. Who knows? This might be the new norm, and we don't know. Right now, I do know one thing: you're being asked to install them. If you're going to install them, you need protection the same way you need protection if you're installing an intrusion alarm, or a smoke detector, or a full-fledged fire alarm, or a PERS unit. My job as the lawyer is to say to you, you have the right by contract to exculpate yourself from liability, even for your own negligence, your own breach of contract. You can exclude liability for it, and you can limit your liability for it. But guess what? If you don't, then you're wide open for a lawsuit. Don't be too surprised if insurance companies, and we've got one on here now as an attendee, don't be too surprised if they exclude liability for pandemic issues. Why not? The business interruption policies exclude it. Why wouldn't this exclude it? But that's the issue. We have another. I'm going to just look at these questions. You're bound if you have medical information on any individual. Well, that's from a central station operator who obviously monitors PERS and might have medical information. It's not the same as a HIPAA violation. You are not. Central stations do not look to the medical AHJs. Okay, the medical societies and those that govern the medical societies are not the AHJ for central stations. So it's quite a bit different. Yes, we do get consent from a customer, from a subscriber, that their medical information can be shared with first responders. That's true. The contracts do provide for that. But this is not a HIPAA issue, okay? Let's not create issues that don't have to be created. Here's another question. I just want to clarify. Are you saying that we should not put these in any type of medical facility, even if it's at the entrance of a hospital used strictly for triage purposes to isolate those with high temperatures so they can be medically checked by hospital staff? Yes, you can install it for that purpose, absolutely. By the way, I don't care if you install it in a private room at the hospital, as long as your contract says this is not a medical device. This is to be used for your entertainment. That's fine. They want to install it in and use it. I don't have a problem with it. You shouldn't have a problem with it. You're not representing that it is a medical grade device used for the treatment or cure or prevention of any illness. And that's fine, as long as you've defined it properly. Again, be careful with how the manufacturers, Barry, are advertising these cameras, because they may not be as acutely concerned with the nuance of how you describe it and use these things. Their job is to sell it. And of course, the popular way of looking at these things, they're fever devices. We don't want anyone with COVID coming into the mall, and we got to get these cameras. Okay, it's nothing different, I guess, than typical advertising in the alarm industry. We protect your life and property 24/7. No one's going to protect you better than we do. Okay, that sounds great. Sign me up. And then you look at the contract. We're not liable for this. As a matter of fact, we're not liable for anything. And that's basically what we're doing with the cameras. Okay, protect the public with the camera. And by the way, we are not going to be responsible. Period. Since this may be a temporarily needed in the all-in-one, can I do a rider? The answer is yes, I can do a rider, and you have to ask for it, because right now it's in the contract. It was easier to put it in the contract, but we can certainly pull it out and create a rider for it. They were complaining about that DocuSign charges a lot of money to make changes. Most of these cameras are manufactured in China. Is this something we need to mention to customers, or should they assume it was manufactured in China and we wash our hands from the risk? I never.
Ken, can I handle that?
Got to that point yet, have we?
Okay, Ken.
Yeah.
Yes, most of these cameras originate in China. However, the more important part is, where is the temperature sensor originating from? Now, some may come from China. I know the ones that are attached with our cameras, they actually originate in Taiwan, which of course is not China. It's obviously it's the
Not
other.
yet. Not yet, right?
Yeah, not yet. A lot of years so far, but yeah, and that has favored status, of course, with our import stuff. But also, we do final assembly here. So we've got parts in those cameras that come from Taiwan, parts that come from Japan, actually, and parts that come from China, and then assembly here. By the time you put it all together, some come pretty close to being made in America. So as we're trying to do, because most of our products are made here, so we're trying to see that most of it is really made in the United States. Unfortunately, we don't make the circuit boards needed for these things. So some of the components just can't be made here, or at least not available economically. That's the story on it, but there's nothing wrong with whether it comes in from China, unless you're selling it to the US government, which I think is even making exceptions for that sometimes, because where is a digital recorder made? Some do come from Taiwan, some come from Korea, but probably 85% come from China. And they're going to be used, but the government is not supposed to be buying from some countries, which would include China.
Okay. Well, again, this medical cannabis facilities came up, concerns. Medical cannabis facilities with HIPAA concerns. I'm not sure what the question is. Again, I don't see any issues with the cannabis. The cannabis has plenty of issues of their own. I don't know how it would interact with the camera issues, so I can't comment on that. Here's a comment. Pearson International Airport in Toronto just had a bunch of cameras installed. Okay. The answering service industry has extensive HIPAA issues when taking messages for doctors' offices. Thank you. That's not PERS, that's answering service. Bart. Bart likes to harass me on all of these. Does the CDC have any compliance guidelines yet? I don't know the answer to that. CDC deals with the technology issue, wouldn't it? Barry, I would think it would.
I don't know. I really don't.
I don't know that they've had any guidelines, not that I've heard of. Okay,
Yeah,
which doesn't mean they don't have it. I just don't know. Better not try putting them into. Wait a minute, where'd that one go? I'm sorry, just 1 second. Better not try putting them into a government deployment if they come from China. Well, listen, I don't know that issue either.
That's what we just talked about. Yeah.
I'm sure that government is going to be buying these cameras to put in the entrance to government buildings and courthouses and things like that. I'm sure that they're going to be, when you're using other people's money, doesn't matter what it costs. So let's put it in, and I'm sure they are going to. They're not going to be worried about FDA or ACLU or anybody else. They're going to be worried about the appearance of trying to deal with this pandemic issue. So they're going to go in, and I don't know what else to say about it. Border Control is looking at a product made in China. So you can tell me which one is it. I just feel like we do not know. I'm not sure what they're trying to say. Barry, you got a compliment about something you said. I'd like to compliment everything you said. I've heard that some of the camera manufacturers in China can still access the cameras. Is this a legitimate concern? Barry, what do you think?
how are they going to access the cameras? This is not possible. These cameras are not transmitting. They're not going out on the internet, although they can be set up to reach a laptop, but usually you need a code to go in for that. So no, I don't think anybody's accessing them in China, and I don't think anybody cares to do that unless it's going into top secret locations in the United States, but I don't think they have a way to do that.
Well, okay. I guess if
Yeah, because
anybody,
the product is made in China doesn't mean that they can access it.
yeah, I guess if China wants to keep track of my temperature, I guess I don't really care, but they're
Well,
welcome
there's no
to.
privacy anymore today, Ken. I think we all know that.
You know, I have a high tech or high or something like that cameras in my house. Every time I walk around my house, I hear them clicking. So I assume I'm being watched. Okay, anyway. They want FDA approval for some devices. I don't know. That's a statement, not a question. I would assume that FDA is eventually going to say they want to approve a true medical device. If it's going into a hospital setting and it's being going to be used for real diagnostic purposes, not triage, I would guess that they're going to want FDA approval. I don't know whether FDA is going to say, you know what, even if used for triage purposes, we want FDA approval on it. You have to realize that the word triage is generally used in an emergency medical setting where there is some kind of catastrophe that's taken place, and they need to go in and separate people very quickly. And that's where the word triage really comes from. It's not simply in a mall where you're separating tall people from short people or skinny from fat or things like that. This is not where the word triage really comes from, where it's really being used. What I'm saying is, I just feel like we do not have enough info to really know what is going on here. Well, first of all, Nick, if you want, just let me know if you want me to unmute you and you can talk, but we do know what's going on. We know, and that's the purpose of the webinar. You can sell these devices. That's the message. You can install them and you can sell them. That's the message. That's what makes it clear. Just be careful about how you describe them. I don't know how else to say it. I keep saying the same thing. Be careful how you describe them and you'll be fine. Contractually, you'll be fine. One second. I lost my my questions. One second. It's about using the device as a gateway into your network for the valuable stuff. Well, they're talking about hacking into the system. Look, any alarm system that offers communication through the internet or cellular or telephone is capable of being hacked. And whether these are or not, so what? Plenty of equipment sold by the alarm industry is made in China. So I don't see this as an issue. Barry, do you see this as an issue? This China, where it's made and things like, look, they haven't been banned yet. Our government has not said you can't import from China yet. I don't think they have they?
No,
Maybe they,
and
no.
the only downside to it, or what I'm looking at is, yes, the U.S. government, sometimes they do buy equipment because it's the only place it comes from, but they really are not supposed to be buying equipment from China. And it's not the only place they're not supposed to be buying it from, but Korea is acceptable, Taiwan is acceptable, where there are a lot of electronic things that come from those areas. The government is not supposed to be buying from China. Do they? Yes. Do they do it knowingly? Probably, but they're not supposed to do it. So again, when a product is only available that comes from China, they don't have a choice.
Okay. Question, can you connect the camera to a recorder?
Yes.
Okay. That's simple enough. Here's one I'm happy to read. Contractually, the contractual protection that we've offered is only good if you use a KK contract. obviously, this is so new in our contract that all the lawyers out there, some of whom are on this webinar, haven't had a chance to copy the provisions yet. So I would suggest that you not wait for it to make the second and third tier of where it's available and get it from the horse's mouth, the horse being me. So get the updated contracts from us. I came on late. However, please tell me if any more changes were made to the verbiage since last week on your all-in-one agreement. No, you're okay. We made the change last week. Didn't happen this morning. Although maybe someone can suggest a good change this morning. Will we be sending a link for the recorded webinar? I lost my internet connection. All of our webinars, just like all of my articles, are posted on our website. We spend a lot of time and effort creating a lot of information for the industry. It's all on the website. You can spend a lifetime going through that website. It took us 45 years to build the website, and it's going to take you at least 45 minutes to look it over. That's my last question. The gavel's about to come down, folks. You have any more questions? Now's the time. Barry, you have any? Well, here we go. For your information, the FDA rating that some manufacturers are touting is FDA 510K. It is a pre-market certification. Section 510K of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requires device manufacturers who must register to notify FDA of their intent to market a medical device at least 90 days in advance. This is known as a pre-market notification, also called PMN or 510K. So what you're saying is that you can register with FDA that you intend to market this thing before you have approval. Okay, does that sound right, Barry? I don't know. Are you doing that, or any of your manufacturers bothering to do that?
I don't think so. And I looked at the FDA and I wasn't able to find enough information. Of course, obviously somebody out there is doing a good job of it, and I'm sure you are. But the problem is, are you admitting that it is a medical device if you try to submit a 510K? Because we do not believe these are medical devices. The FDA is saying they're medical devices, but we don't believe they are. So if we submit something, are we admitting that, oh, this is a medical device?
I think contractually the industry is better off describing these devices as non-medical. In fact, the contract does use the word triage in it, so even if FDA is going to take this position that any thermal imaging camera is by definition a medical device, I don't know. Maybe we'll get there. I don't think we're there now. I don't think that's what we're going to find out right now. Here's a question for Barry. I guess someone's tired of hearing me talk.
I'm in trouble now.
Can these devices be installed to scan outdoors? And do you know if anyone has tested the optimal location to use these devices? According to FDA, to work properly, it must be located in a place with a room temperature of 68 to 76 degrees, used in a room with no draft and out of direct sunlight. Okay.
For the most part, that is correct. You can't use them outside because they will be affected by those temperatures outside, whether they are high or low. So for instance, in the winter in New York, where you are, Ken, somebody comes in from the cold, they might have temperature and it won't show because that cold brought down their temperature for the sensor. So it is advised that they spend at least 2 minutes inside. And well, while we are not specifying the exact temperatures inside. I think that is a good range, what we just heard. And yes, if there's an air conditioner blowing right in the area where you're taking their temperature, yes, it could affect it, a heater or an air conditioner. So obviously you don't want to put it where there is direct air conditioning or heat. Off in the distance shouldn't make any difference.
Okay, 510K approval is FDA approval as far as the devices go, and they do not need to get FDA 510K clearance now. That's correct. 510K clearance now is definitely not required, and neither is FDA approval on the device required now during this pandemic. And by the way, Barry, how long have these thermal devices actually been out there?
No more than about a year at most. They've gotten extremely, I hate to use the word popular, but they have in terms of sales only over the last 4 or 5 months. But they've been available for about a year. And excuse me, there's also been the thermal ones that I think we know can spot people and not recognize who they are necessarily by heat, which is a whole nother kind of a camera. And that's been around for many years. They just have not been using them at that time to take temperature.
What's the difference between one of these cameras that detects heat and elevated body temperature? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, not really. You have to have a way of being able to convert what you're seeing into either centigrade or Fahrenheit and get a reading. So the original security cameras, which were made to be able to see someone in complete darkness without putting out any infrared themselves that could be visible. And those are the ones that you would see images in red, in yellow, sometimes coming up. So people didn't really look like you would normally see them, but you would be able to recognize, hey, there's somebody there where there shouldn't be. Those kind of cameras had no ability to be able to tell the particular temperature. Now, I'm not saying they couldn't be converted to do so, but they were never doing that.
Okay, so wait a minute. Attached to alarm output, PTZ, auto tracking, etc. Not sure what he's trying to tell us. And thermal calibrators, are they essential, in Barry's opinion, because the ones without thermal devices seem to work? You understand?
If you're looking to know about elevated temperature, yes, you do need the ones that are going to be able to come up and tell you this person has 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't let them in. It's also going to alert. So an alert can be sent to a laptop or to a cell phone and to tell you, we've got somebody here that we've got a problem with and we better check them further. So again, it's not let's eliminate them, it's let's test. Let's go a little bit further and know for sure with a medical grade device. Because for $79, you could buy, I don't know if they're approved, so let's say $150. You can have one that you could put 4 inches or 3 inches away from someone's forehead and be able to tell the exact temperature. That would be a medical device. It should be an FDA approved medical device. So therefore you're verifying what's going on. I hope I've answered the question. I know it was kind of a two-part to it.
This may be naive because I'm not in the alarm industry and I'm not technical, but would a camera sort of be used, let's say, in a facility in conjunction with motion detectors within a space so that you could check to see whether there's somebody or what has set off the motion detector? That's purely an intrusion device at that point. What is that? Why they were originally developed? They weren't developed to check COVID-19. That's for sure.
Well, I think that once the COVID-19 hit, I think that people in Taiwan, Germany, and China realized there's a market here. Let's make something. And they did make what are basically attachments to cameras, but also a program to be able to bring up the exact temperature that it's reading. And that could be done in big groups or it could be done in individual people walking through. So it is something that I think they did recognize is coming. Now remember that this pandemic technically started in December in China. This is not something that is so brand new. So while they were holding back information, well, there were some manufacturers who I guess knew to jump on this. And again, they weren't all in China. But yes, that's a big part of it. And they had to come up with a way of converting what they're seeing into centigrade and Fahrenheit.
I'm surprised CNN hasn't accused the alarm industry of causing this whole pandemic just so they can sell these thermal cameras.
Yeah, and don't forget that most of these cameras, and ours included, they are also facial recognition. Well, it's hard to recognize a face if they're all wearing masks. So if they're supposed to be coming in with a mask on, you're not going to recognize anybody. But if they're not wearing masks, or especially later when they won't need to have masks, yes, there'll be facial recognition, and you will be able to know who that person is based on what you've already set up your parameters on it.
Is that the same camera or a different camera?
Same camera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it does a lot of things.
So yeah, we're getting a comment here. They're great for deployment where you want to protect critical infrastructure, and they do have alarm outputs that can be attached to the alarm panel to set trips, which is what I thought. Did Barry not find that some of the AI in systems seem to be actually built and racial exclusion included in AI? I don't know. That sounds.
I really have no idea what we're talking about racial exclusion.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. As a distributor, we are aware of strict export compliance regulations in place that require documents to be filled out for each sale. Can Barry touch on this and the process during the sale? Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Well, that depends. And we say in the sale, when we ship, for instance, to Canada, yes, we have to document what it is, where it's made, etc. So when the United States is shipping equipment to Canada, we have to do this. I don't know about Mexico because we don't ship directly to Mexico. Distributors that we're selling to might, but we don't, so I don't know. So yes, this is required at times. It's not required for sales within the United States. In other words, there's no reason why you would have to say where this product comes from necessarily. Now, we know it's usually marked on there. It's usually marked in a box. It's marked somewhere. But I don't know of a specific requirement to do that just for sale within the U.S.
Right, and we're talking about an alarm company selling to one of its customers. There's
Right.
no forms, there's no special forms that need to be filled out.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, right. Otherwise, that would be required for almost every product that came out of China. So that's not going to be the case.
Correct.
Well, we've actually managed to spend an hour on this topic. Oh, here we go. Would you recommend having an additional one-sheet disclaimer for customers to sign that this is not for medical purposes, just to reinforce the idea this is not a medical device? I've designed the security all-in-one to cover this issue. It is completely sufficient to protect you. Now that I said that, I can't post this webinar on my website. Only kidding, I will. Yes, we've designed the contract to protect you. Do you need a separate rider for it? Well, if someone is so concerned about that, we could add the disclaimer to the disclaimer notice, which is another document that we do suggest you use when you use the commercial security all-in-one contract. So, but from a contractual standpoint, I'm comfortable that we've made the change that you should have in your contract with your customer. That I can't put it any better than that. I would suggest if you sell these devices, I certainly suggest you update your contract right now and get the new form. And if for some reason you want it in a rider format, I suppose we could design it. That's not how it's designed at the moment. All right. I want to thank Barry for taking his time, valuable time, and sharing his knowledge and information during this webinar. I want to thank all of you for attending. and not complaining too much in your questions to me. And I hope you learned something, and I hope you had fun, and I hope you sell a lot of thermal cameras out there.
Barry
Eventually.
West thermal cameras.
Yes, actually, Sperry West is Barry's company. So please look. Where do they find those, Barry? Give me some distributors that you want to use.
You mean little ones like ADI and Annixter and many others. So yes, and those are main, let's say, prime ones. And there may be a promotion coming up with ADI for pre-sale for something that'll be kind of interesting, which
Now listen,
check
when
with
you
ADI about, yeah.
when you go
But
to
I'm not
ADI,
recommending a specific one.
I'm gonna put Barry in a spot right now. When you go to ADI, make sure you look on the box that says approved by Ken Kirschenbaum, because if you see that, you know you're okay. Barry, we'll have to work out a royalty for that approval process.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. Really, thank you for allowing me to be involved. So I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you. Everybody, I'm going to sign off, and thanks again. Everybody stay safe and make a lot of money. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.